Welcome to the Understanding Boys podcast. I'd like to begin by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land on which this podcast is recorded, the Boonwurrung people of the Kulin Nation. We pay respects to leaders past, present and emerging. The Understanding Boys podcast is a series of conversations exploring what it is to be a good man these days. So if you had a story about being a good man and that you could tell a 14-year-old boy and he'd actually listen, what would that story be? And that's really what I'm asking our guests today. I'm Dr. Ray Swan, and we're a community of teachers and parents concerned with the education and growth of boys in the modern world. The series is brought to you by Brighton Grammar, an all-boys school in Melbourne. To learn more about the podcast, please visit understandingboys.com.au. Dianne Vella-Brodrick is a professor and head of research at the Centre for Positive Psychology at the University of Melbourne. Her research interests include the development and evaluation of wellbeing programs, particularly in the areas of positive education and performance optimisation. Dianne serves on numerous research advisory boards and has worked for not-for-profit organisations, schools from all different sectors, community services and large commercial organisations. And in this capacity, she works to assess and promote wellbeing for all. We hope you enjoy the conversation today. Well, it's with great pleasure that I welcome you, Professor Dianne Vella-Brodrick. Welcome to the Understanding Boys podcast.
Thank you very much. I'm really pleased to be talking about all these interesting topics with you.
Fantastic. One of the things I wanted to start by asking, and many of our listeners may not know, and I'm not sure I entirely actually really fully understand, is what does a professor do?
That's the mysterious question, isn't it? Well, a professor, really the primary aim of a professor is to advance knowledge, and they do that really through rigorous research, teaching and service to the profession and community. So being a professor is something that involves a real thirst for knowledge and curiosity to answer big questions. And it's important that we use scientific sort of approaches when we ask and explore those questions. So it's important that we use rigorous methods and critical methods of inquiry. We're really looking for facts and trying to look for the truth behind a lot of the answers to big questions. Of course, we don't always find the answers to the questions, but that's the quest, to get us close to the answers that will solve a lot of the wicked problems in the community, big issues that have prevailed. That's the ultimate dream of a professor, to actually have these large-scale projects that we work closer and closer towards solving the mystery of what some of the answers to the really perplexing issues out in the community are. And some of them are very serious, and it's quite a responsibility. But being a professor involves working with the community, and it's very much a partnership with identifying what are important questions to be asking in the first place.
And it's interesting, to me it seems like many more academics are far more available to the community, being based in a site, working with a group, as opposed to being in the ivory, palace in the days of old, at a university and so on, and actually seeing people really making that translation is so important. And I guess I imagine in terms of getting a better sample and understanding what's really happening, that also informs your work. It's not just a matter of evaluating data that comes in. You're actually in the process of working with the data and working out how to collect the data, and how does your own experience and biases, etc., influence and impact the decision making that you might make as you do those evaluations.
Yeah, it's really important that we don't stay in our ivory tower, and that we are working towards feasible applications of the knowledge that we're gaining, and that involves talking to community and end users. Really, at the end of the day, that's what's really important. We're all about impact. There's little point in creating these research projects, having them published in scientific journals or in big theses, collecting dust in libraries, and no one having access to them, really. So they need to make a difference. The work that we do is really about helping the community in some way advance knowledge for the betterment of society.
Absolutely. So in today's podcast, what we're going to explore a little bit is about your work as a professor in positive psychology, talk a bit about strengths, break down some of the concepts in positive psychology and how Parents might be able to understand better and possibly even access or use those. If we get time, talk a bit about mindfulness and what we're starting to understand about the positive benefits that are coming out of the mindfulness research, particularly in schools. And then to talk about a great example of, I think what you're already talking about in terms of being involved in a community and using research to provide a solution to a real challenge around anxiety and performance for kids, which is the BioDash program. I'm looking forward to talking with you about that as well. So if we talk firstly about what is positive psychology, many parents and many of our listeners would have heard of the term. They might have seen some things in their news feed about, positive psychology. This is a benefit. They'd probably be seeing at their schools, that schools are becoming interested, businesses are becoming interested. There seems to be a lot of excitement. But I think we also understand that it's a relatively new field as well. Yeah, but tell us a bit about the field of positive psychology.
Sure. So positive psychology, to summarise it, is really about feeling good, functioning well and doing good. I think that's just a really good representation of what positive psychology is about. Often people think it's only about the feeling good part, and I want to acknowledge that it is part of it, but it's not the only part of it. We as human beings are very complex, and it's important that we do feel good, but we have everyday activities that we need to be able to do. So we need to be able to function well, we need to be able to concentrate, we need to be able to engage in going to work or going to school, and all the different things that we do on a daily basis, and to optimise our performance in the things that we do to be able to feel like we're competent in the things that we do, that we've got some sort of mastery over the environment, and that we feel that we're not just helping ourselves and living a fulfilling life for ourselves, but also for the greater good. So we need to have some larger purpose as well. And positive psychology taps into thinking about how you can personally contribute to the greater good and to the well-being of other people, not just yourself. And the way in which positive psychology promotes you being able to do that is to really tap into your strengths and resources that are around you. So everybody has strengths. There'll be different combinations of strengths, but when you mobilise your strengths and apply them in everyday activities, that's more likely to be motivating, energising, and make you feel like you're actually making progress because you're using qualities that are innate, that are very natural to you, and that you can perform quite well at. So it's really about being able to identify what your strengths are and to be able to use them on a regular basis, not just for yourself, but for other people as well. And I guess this contrasts with the traditional approach to feeling good or mental health approaches, because in the past there was a tendency to focus largely on weaknesses and to attempt to fix what's wrong rather than to work on what's going well, what capacities and resources people have, and to draw on those.
Is it too simplistic to say in some ways that there's a degree in which psychology is about looking at what's happened and reaching an understanding about the kinds of patterns of behaviour that one might practice or experience or understand, whereas in positive psychology it's the telos, it's the where am I headed and what might I do, and tapping into that sort of what we understand about motivation, as you're saying, about purpose and being good at things and actually getting better at things as well, and feeling that I'm making progress and making a contribution and then I'm getting feedback that's recognising my own unique gifts and strengths.
Yeah, to a certain extent, I would agree with that. I think that positive psychology does take on a fairly solution-focused approach, which is forward-thinking. You approach things with the strengths that you have, with the motivation, with hope, with optimism. But at the same time, you draw on experiences in the past that are going to help you become motivated and action-oriented, because it's really important that you know what's worked well in the past, that you know what your values are, that you can see patterns and learn from those experiences so that you can be, I suppose, more effective in the future.
Yeah.
And that's what growth is about, I suppose.
Yeah. And as you're talking, I'm conscious of Seligman and others' work around the character strengths and virtues. And as someone who loves the kind of classics, I'm thinking of, I think it was Heraclitus who said, your character will shape your destiny. Who you are will affect, it seems very sort of self-evident in one sense, but in reading that work, I really like, looking at identifying what some of these big character strengths and virtues actually are, where we see them in movies and in literature, and how we love, someone like Jean Valjean's journey in Les Mis, where he goes from being his greatest weaknesses become his greatest strengths in so many ways. I'm interested if you could talk to us, what are some of your strengths, in a sense, and how they help to shape you and your life as a professor?
Yes, so some of my strengths are love of learning and curiosity. They're always...
No great surprise there as a
they're
professor.
Always up there, and so I'm very fortunate, particularly in my role, because as a professor, I think I explained earlier on that we are often engaged in lecturing and teaching side of things, as well as research, as well as the community service and engagement and advancing the profession more generally. And I have landed in the right job for the strengths that I have, because I do have that love of learning and curiosity, and particularly as the research director at the Centre for Positive Psychology, being inquisitive and always wanting to know more and to try and advance the science is certainly suited to my character strengths. But you also need to have the zest and energy to keep going, and the perseverance. But as I was saying, if you do use your strengths, they can often be energising. And a lot of people ask me, how do I do all the things that I do? Because I always seem to be on the go. Well, it's because the things that I do are very much aligned with my values and my strengths, and so they energise me rather than deflate me. And for me, I don't really sort of see it as a job, what I do as a job, but it's just so inherent. I'm so curious about everything that if I wasn't a professor, I don't know how I would channel that, but I'd have to find another way of, channeling it.
You could be a teacher.
I could be a teacher, and I think I'd enjoy that very much.
It's a fantastic job. Speaking of your research, something just popped into my mind. I'm pretty sure I read something of yours more recently about extroverts and introverts and happiness. Mm-hmm. Can you tell us a little bit about that? Because in the simple layperson's context that I read it in was that there seemed to be a correlation between extroversion and happiness. Did I get that right? Yes,
that's right. So there is research to support the view that extroverted individuals, particularly when you define extroversion from a sociability point of view, that they tend to have more satisfying lives. And
what do they say for the introverts amongst us?
Yeah, well, so let me expand a little bit on that. So it really depends on the context in which you live. And so our work, and it's especially the work of a PhD student of mine, Rod Lawn, and myself and Gavin Slemp were supervising Rod. And what we found was that it depends on the context in which you live. So Australia being a very westernised context, values sociability and, being out there, being vocal about things that tend to get more attention. And so if you are an extrovert, you have a better fit with the environment when you're in a westernised society.
Which would make sense, wouldn't it?
Yes,
I mean, it does seem to be,
right.
Even in Australia, our culture is very much based around sort of connections. And I guess there's the other driver of the self-determination theory stuff around, connectedness and relatedness, I suppose, and is in that area as well, isn't it? And how we relate to others. As parents, do you think it's important that we provide social opportunities for our kids? Do we need to coach them in how they're going socially? Is that something that we need to pay attention to, particularly when they're younger?
Well, I mean, it is interesting because I think you have to be true to your personality. And there certainly is a bias in Australia towards being more sociable and extrovert, and therefore you're probably more comfortable if you have that fit. But there are introverts and who feel that when they are true to their quality, they feel a lot more authentic, and if they can sort of own that, then they're very comfortable, despite the perception that the majority of people are extrovert. but in fact it's about 50% introvert and 50% extrovert. And
the rest of us are just pretending to be extroverted, is that right?
Yes, yeah. Everyone has a preference to be extrovert. But if you can be comfortable being an introvert and adapting that, there are a lot of benefits to having both personality types. And we're talking about it as if though they are a clear dichotomy, but they're not. It's a continuum, sure, and people sort of come in and out of those different characteristic styles. Right. And extroversion isn't only about the sociability side of things, but it's also about how introspective you are, how much of a thinker you are, and careful sort of deliberation. And those qualities are really important in the world as well. So when you asked about, parents and should they be training their children to be more sociable.
Taking them to drama classes and making sure that they're class captains and these sorts of things.
Yeah, no, I don't think that's necessary. I think it's really important to help a young person embrace whatever their personality is and to help them be able to use whatever that personality is to the best effect that they can, and giving them lots of ideas of how that can be really beneficial rather than trying to mould them into something that perhaps they're not comfortable doing. Yeah. We can't all be sociable and talkers, then who's going to listen, and who's going to be the deep thinkers as opposed to those that are a little bit more flamboyant and, and think very quickly and move very quickly. So you need that balance, different people, yeah.
As we're talking about character strengths, and we're saying things like being, love of life and being, having zest and these sorts of things, and also virtues. I mean, virtues is a bit of an older fashioned word in a way, isn't it? Having a character virtue, a quality of being that, we come back to that helps us, maybe provides a map or a way of thinking about how to be, caring for others, or someone who is has humility or perseverance and so on. I'm wondering about just unpacking that and the similarities and or differences between a virtue and a value, because again, a value might be something that we sort of ascribe, that we keep coming back to and thinking about, and then perhaps virtues are things that we hope to embody. I'm not sure how you see the difference, or even if there is a difference, maybe they're interchangeable.
I definitely think that there's overlaps between the two terms, virtues and values, but I think a value can encapsulate so much more as well. So you could value having a car, and what does that really represent? It's not really a virtue per se. Yeah. So a virtue, I think, is some inherent quality that has a human element to it. That's almost like an experiential quality that is how we relate, especially to others, and interconnectedness, and preserving a really good sort of future and quality of life. It's about our recipe in a way of how to live a good life, and that will vary from person to person, but there are, I think, these fundamental virtues. They're almost like the Ten Commandments, where they're so universal in a way that most people would ascribe to virtues. Most people would say they want to be honest, that they'd like to have humility, that they want to be caring, and love is important, all those sort of important virtues, but they don't necessarily play out in everyone's day-to-day life, but they'd still ascribe to them.
That a value perhaps like integrity. And it's interesting, isn't it? Because again, as a parent, and I'm sure there's a lot of crossover again between the genders in this space as well, because as you're talking, I'm thinking some of those virtues are culturally based, aren't they? Like there might be there's going to be different places and different presentations of those. But with values, how do people, and how do we as parents, or if we're young men listening to this, how do we kind of know what our values are? Is that something that we just sort of choose? Is it a bit of a work in progress, something that we come down to? I know personally I've spent a lot of time over the last 5 years actually thinking about my own values, and it might speak to perhaps my age, I don't know. But what advice would you have, or what are your thoughts around picking and choosing values and knowing values?
Yeah, well, first of all, I think you need to have the language of what values are, to have something quite explicit, because most of the time we don't really stop and go, oh, well, at the moment I'm really supporting, my virtue of love. It just happens naturally, and that's in a way a bit of a definition about what a virtue is, that it is fairly natural, especially if it's helping others in some way. But I think one of the ways in which we can learn to understand the virtues a bit more and to apply those virtues in a more deliberate way is to understand what they are first and foremost. And this is sort of relates to the strength of positive psychology, in that it offers a wellbeing language, a wellbeing science. It makes us think about what do these terms mean, and that it's okay to talk about wellbeing. So it's encouraging a literacy around wellbeing.
Because we value it.
Because we value it, exactly right. And so I think we can be doing the same thing with virtues, so that once it's in people's psyche that there's this list of virtues, they can be more deliberate about, oh, okay, I haven't really thought about this virtue very much, and maybe it's something I want to explore a bit further. So it might help people to work across the breadth of virtues.
I know with kid work that I do with kids, when I start with a value, that's an easy way sometimes to talk about difference, because sometimes when kids present behaviourally in an antisocial way, it's because there's a mismatch in values. So it can be a case of sometimes saying, I really value honesty, and when you present it this way, then we seem to have a clash. Or for example, in a school setting, when someone's changed, rather than making it about the person, finding that way of talking about the value helps to unpack, and then we're both talking about this, developing a shared understanding around the values. So I think values can be super important in that context, and really useful for parents. I'm just going to throw one more at you, just why not, while we're at it, because it's just occurred to me. Yes. What then the place or use, or how do morals kind of play into this space as well?
Well, morals are very personal, so that's very much dependent on your religious upbringing, your family, a lot more sort of proximal things that are affecting you, and that you've made a decision as an individual to follow a set of morals. And that's why they vary a lot more than, say, something like virtues that are a bit more collective in nature.
Do you think that you were saying earlier about getting that alignment between those things, do you think it's a case that we have better wellbeing generally when we are more aligned in expressing our virtues that are aligned to our values, sitting within a moral framework? Is that kind of where
most
we might
definitely
seem to help see things are doing well for us?
Yes, because you're more authentic, you're more consistent, you're more predictable too. So you're probably
people like that, don't they?
Yeah, people like predictability. Think about it: if you are an employer and you've got a staff member, you want to be able to predict what they're going to do most of the time, and hopefully that they're going to have a core set of values that respect the work that they do and respect the people that they interact with. So there are some universal sort of virtues and values, but then how that plays out is a lot more personalised, and there's lots of options, of how that individual will choose to represent that professionalism, for example, and that's where their own morals will come into play.
So what I wanted to ask you about was getting back to the research evidence into positive psychology, and a term that comes up a lot is resilience, and the ability to bounce back, to when faced with adversity, to you look at previous experiences, you were saying earlier, and what we've learned from that. What are some of the patterns? What are some of the things that personalised work for me? And also, I suppose, the role of the parent. How does the parent provide the kind of feedback that enables the child to grow into a more resilient person? I'm interested in your thoughts, firstly, about that, and secondly, how that works. It seems to be a counter to resilience, and that is that expressing when we are not coping and we're not feeling well, and no, I can't be resilient. I'm really finding this hard. How do parents, firstly, a bit about resilience, and secondly, how do parents kind of juggle that? It's not a dichotomy, but it can appear to be one at times.
Yeah, so resilience is about bouncing back when there is adversity, but also moving forward. And this is a big ask a lot of the time, expecting especially young people to not only cope with a very difficult situation, but to always grow and move forward from a situation. And that's great in theory, and we want to be able to equip young people with the skills to be able to cope and to have the skills to learn from their experiences. But that is not always possible. And it's also important that young people can put their hand up and say, look, I'm not up to that right now. I need time and space to be able to ponder what's just happened, to be able to get myself together, to be able to function and go to school, if something's happened. And hopefully in time they can adapt to that situation, but it's really important to enable them to express their vulnerability as well. We are only human, and adults often have trouble coping and moving forward as well. So to have that expectation put on young people, I think, can be unrealistic. Of course, we want to equip them with tools to help them manage situations better and to give them options of different ways of thinking about a situation. If they're coming out of a adverse situation and they're completely negative about the situation, they've catastrophized the situation, it's really important for a parent to be able to say,
perspective taking.
Yeah, exactly. Is it really as bad as you've made out? Do you really think these people are going to be saying these negative things about you, and for how long? It's a short-term thing. Yes, it's uncomfortable, but people move on. They're not going to be thinking about that situation much longer, and you've got to,
Too busy living out their own movies with some other person that's now walked, into scene 3.
Yeah, exactly right. So parents have got that role, and teachers and anyone that works alongside young people. Friends can be pointing out these things, and often that's where you need to have a bit of self-compassion and other compassion as well. And so I think good advice is that when people are experiencing something difficult or challenging, to imagine that they have a friend that's experiencing the same thing, what would they tell their friend? What advice would they give their friend? What sort of support would they give them, and caring words would they give them? Why don't they do that to themselves? And sometimes...
What do you need right now?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And sometimes parents can be too much in the advice, you should be doing this, you shouldn't have done that, and really all they want...
fixing. Why don't you do this and why don't you do that?
Exactly.
Let's just take it away, or I won't let you... You don't have to feel the pain. I've done this new thing. I bought this new whatever. I've replaced the toy,
And they have great intentions, they've only got the well-being of their child in mind, but it's not really helping them develop the skills that they need, because these are going to be recurring things, not exactly the same problem, but, challenges come up all the time, and young people need to learn strategies themselves of regulating their emotions, regulating their thoughts, so that they can function well.
Yeah, absolutely. I really like what you were saying as well about space and time. That it's such a busy culture, isn't it? We get so caught up in doing things. We're always checking online. We're always looking at images, and it's such a rapid space. And I think a lot of what you're talking about, and also hearing you talk about self-care and self-compassion, and what we're starting to understand about that, and I think about a practice like Meta. I'm hopefully going to talk to you a bit about mindfulness shortly, about thinking about how do I build that capacity within myself to care for myself, and then how can I then spread that into caring for others. So let's talk a bit about mindfulness. I know a lot of your work has been in that space and helping translate some of the work that's coming out around mindfulness and the positive benefits of it, whether they're cognitive benefits, whether they're about perspective taking, whether it's sort of, emotional regulation and so on. For the benefit of the listeners, how would you sort of describe mindfulness, and where might a parent or a young person listening to this podcast start to, what's a way in?
So the way I would define mindfulness is paying attention on purpose. So it's a very deliberate strategy to being aware of the things that are around you. And it's paying attention to what's happening, but in a non-judgmental way. In a way, it's like accepting the things that are going on around you, just listening, paying attention, and being in the moment. And as you said earlier, Ray, I think one of the big problems is that we are on the go all the time. Our life is, you press the on button and you're just buzzing and going throughout the day until you go to sleep, and there's very little time for any reflection or appreciation. And there are so many wonderful things that are going on around us that we're oblivious to a lot of the time. And just being mindful of those things, I think, can be really helpful. So I like to look at mindfulness in relation to positive psychology. And there are a lot of strategies in positive psychology that are linked to mindfulness. For example, savouring. And savouring is, smelling the roses. And once you've noticed the roses, really trying to amplify the experience of those roses. And I mean, the roses is just a metaphor to, a whole range.
I like the one with chocolate. That's my favourite.
Okay. All right. Chocolate then. And so we are programmed as humans to pay attention to a lot of the negative things that go on in our life. That's called the negativity bias. And it's just a survival mechanism that we need to be vigilant to any danger that comes our way. And so we, as a result, often tend to miss out on the positive things. So there could be 20 pretty okay things that are happening in your day, and then 1 or 2 negative things. And what do you pay attention to? The negative things. It's like a report card. If someone hasn't done so well and, they've got a D, that's what sort of stands out rather than the 2 Bs. Or
we carry that, don't we? It's amazing how we carry it and ruminate. And
so it really has, the negative really has a salience for us, and there was a genetic reason for that. But for us to have more balance in our life, for us to feel more content, for us not to have mental illness, we really need to start paying attention to a lot of the positive things that are going on around us, because there are lots of positive things. And so that's where, you're paying attention to that. And that's why in positive psychology we have things like counting acts of kindness that you've observed by others, and that sort of makes you realise...
Gratitude bucket as well.
That there are good things going on around us, there are good people that are trying to help others. And so for me, that's where the connection with mindfulness comes in. But of course, mindfulness is not just about identifying the positive things and sitting with those. It's about identifying everything factually and not even necessarily categorising them into positive or negative or anything in between. They just are experiences, and you just learn to live with that experience and learn to be more comfortable with that experience. And I think that just helps to relieve a lot of tension for people having that mindfulness. And mindfulness has been associated with a lot of positive qualities. But the trick with mindfulness is that you have to practice it regularly.
It's muscle.
Yeah, it very much is muscle memory. You've got to practice it to get the benefits from it. And that practice can happen in a variety of different ways. So
it doesn't take long as well.
It doesn't take long. So like you were saying, you mentioned the chocolate before. Yeah. We eat. I eat too often, unfortunately, but we eat, for example.
Let's not start on the drinking, okay?
No, I don't drink, but I eat. Only water. So you can be paying attention on purpose to eating and what eating sort of feels like, and appreciation of having, nutritious food, for example, or delicious food if it's chocolate. And just even paying attention of mindfully walking and mindfully seeing the beautiful green trees around you, those sorts of things. So you can incorporate mindfulness into your everyday activities. And it helps to sharpen your attention and your focus. And these are really important skills, particularly for young people in school and learning. So mindfulness, I think, is a really great skill. But you don't have to...
Pre-exam, you could, taking a deep breath and slowing down, being aware, noticing. Yeah,
that's right. Mindful breathing is certainly one you can be doing anywhere for less than a minute. You can be doing mindful breathing if you're sitting on a train. And they can be really helpful. So you don't necessarily need to be spending, half an hour at a time sitting there in a room by yourself trying to be mindful. It's something that's better, in fact, if you do in your everyday functioning.
One of the things I love about what you're talking about at the moment is just the practice and the regular practice, and it makes me think of routines and how something as simple as a routine, you can build it into your day, and it becomes a thing and becomes part of becomes part of who you are. One of the routines that I love, a friend of mine, a mum, she's got 3 beautiful boys, and she has a thing that she does called a rose and a thorn at the end of the day, having dinner, which is a really important routine, I think, isn't it? If you can have whatever your family is, and the people around you, if you can come together and share a meal once a day, I think it's a great thing to be able to do. So at that meal, I have a rose and a thorn. So what was something that was a bit you're working with today, that maybe didn't go as well as you liked, or that you're sitting with, and then consciously putting that down, and then what was a rose? What was something beautiful that you saw or experienced, or even a beautiful wondering as well can be so great to hear. And I found as a parent, sharing that around the table has also been great because, it awakens that childishness in yourself a bit, doesn't it? When you sort of see, it's one of the things I love about teaching actually, is you seeing the kids and when they first make that connection and they read that book or they get that quote or they play that riff on the guitar or whatever it is, that moment where they're truly themselves and truly alive, it's a wonderful thing to see.
Yeah, and it's great to hear about the things that have excited them or things that have went well throughout the day, and it has a contagion effect, puts everybody around the table in a good mood, and you can enjoy your meal, and then
it's important if Dad's cooked. In my case, if I cooked a meal, I need as much
I don't know what goes
contagion as I can muster. That's very true. Cooking is not a character strength or a virtue or a moral or anything. Anyway. Well, one of the things...
Growth mindset, Ray.
Growth mindset, yet. I just have to say yet at the end of everything, don't I? Cooking is not a great thing I do, yet.
Yes.
We're talking about mindfulness, we're talking about routines and practices and the benefits of paying attention and becoming aware of the things that we're experiencing in every moment. And you've been suggesting, and I know it to be the case, that there's strong evidence around the positive benefits of that. Part of the positive benefits of that is actually in your program BioDash. Can you talk us through what BioDash is? Because it going right back to the start of our interview, and we're talking about professorship and working in communities and finding ways to take things out of that need to be, spent time on and rigorously interrogated, but then they've got to go back into the rough and tumble of everything. And one of the great things that you have been working on is this program BioDash. Tell us a little bit about it and what you sort of see the benefits and where they might take you.
Sure. So I'll start by telling you how it came about first of all. So I do quite a bit of research evaluating wellbeing programs, particularly in schools. And what I found was that when wellbeing programs were being rolled out, particularly to secondary school students, there was a lot of eye rolling that went along with this, which suggested to me that not every young person was receptive to learning about wellbeing. And given what I know about some of the programs in wellbeing and some of the strategies that have been developed in wellbeing, I know that they can be really useful. There have been what we know as meta-analyses exploring the effects of wellbeing sort of strategies, and they've come up, quite favourably that there is some benefit to being able to do some of these strategies. So the fact that these young people weren't really very embracing of these programs disturbed me. And I thought, why is this the case? You know, we know that the incidence of mental illness is so high. 1 in 4 young people have reported suffering a mental illness over the past 12 months. And we know that if we don't do anything to help, that actually is a path for them well into the future. It's not something that they can shed lightly. So it's a serious concern for us, and it is important, therefore, for us to be delivering wellbeing programs. And I think schools are the ideal place to deliver wellbeing programs, because it means that it's a more equitable process, that anyone that goes to school has got the opportunity to learn wellbeing skills, which is going to help them not just at school but beyond school as well. So it, as I said, really concerned me that they weren't really willing to learn about wellbeing. A lot of them thought it was a bit of a joke, or it was an opportunity to relax at school because it's not being assessed a lot of the time.
Miss, wake me up in 20 minutes. That's everything.
Oh, was that you, Ray? So that sort of thing goes on, and we, in my work as an academic, it's really important for me, and when I do the evaluation of programs, to get the facts and to have the honest facts, so that we can actually make a difference and try and improve things. And that's what I wanted to do with the BioDash. So for me, the BioDash is an optimal performance and wellbeing program, and it's geared towards making learning about wellbeing more tangible, fun and engaging and personalised, because they're the things that young people told me were lacking.
So if you get those three again, so it's
that to try and make wellbeing more tangible, fun and engaging and personalised. And so the way in which we do that with the BioDash program is that we incorporate those science-based strategies. So we've worked out a well-sequenced sort of program. We've worked with young people to come up with the strategies that are of interest to them, that they're more likely to apply. So we've been fortunate to work with you here at Brighton Grammar School with a group of boys that have helped us co-design the BioDash program. And so we've been able to gather really valuable feedback from them. We've put together this science-based program about wellbeing strategies, and then we've brought in biofeedback and gaming features so that it becomes more tangible and fun to learn about wellbeing. And the way in which that's done is the biofeedback enables the young people to try the different strategies that they've learnt and to actually get some feedback, some physiological feedback about how their body is actually responding to those strategies. So is their body able to relax, for example, in response to trying a breathing technique or a mental imagery exercise or a mindfulness exercise? And we can tell this because we have portable devices now that are incredible. They're so versatile, that measure brain waves, that measure respiration, that measure heart rate, that measure skin conductance.
It is extraordinary. I mean, I remember you telling me about you're going to measure brain waves, and I sort of went straight back to a 1960s space movie, and I was thinking they were going to have these huge kind of helmets on and
electrodes and gel and no, none of that
shaved
anymore.
Heads and the whole bit.
That's right.
It's incredible, isn't it? The technology is extraordinary.
It is, and so we can gather information about whether they are able to increase focus and reduce tension and anxiety when they try these different strategies. And for them to actually be able to see on an iPad what's happening to them personally when they're trying things.
As well.
Immediately. It's immediate feedback. And it gives them information from which they can then make decisions about what strategies they want to use, which ones work best for them, which ones don't work for them.
Go home and share it with mum as a rose.
Yeah, there you go. Exactly. I would hope so. I hope that a lot of the Brighton Grammar School boys are doing this.
No doubt.
But yes, and then what happens with the gaming part is that we have introduced apps and games that enable them to use some of those strategies in challenges. And so one example is that there's an icy landscape, forest landscape, and the more they relax, the more quickly they can transform that icy landscape into a summer landscape. And they see it transforming before their very eyes, and they know that it's because they're relaxing. They get information on the screen about whether they're reducing, their anxiety levels, and as they reduce it, they're able to transform an image in front of them. We've also developed an app called Walk the Walk with Harmonious Productions that tries to replicate scenarios that young people experience. Scenarios like having to do some public speaking, or having to go out and invite someone to an event. Or
some of these extroversion tasks that we're talking about.
Yes,
earlier. Yeah.
absolutely. And playing sport, or, feeling that they have to perform academically or through the performing arts. And so we've mimicked some of those situations through apps, and they have to navigate that and try and relax as much as possible. And when their biofeedback is telling them that they're starting to get stressed out with that context, what happens is the game pauses and it asks them to apply one of the strategies that they've learnt. And they can actually see, because there's a really useful sort of indicator like the traffic light signals. If it's green, it means you're relaxed. If it's amber, you're in between. And if it's red, that means you're quite anxious. And so they can see that feedback immediately. And once they've been able to relax, then they go back into the game and try and move forward with lots of challenges taking place. So through the use of biofeedback and gaming features, it maintains their interest, and we've got games that are increasingly more challenging. So they get information about how long it took them to be able to master that challenge, and they'll want to try and beat that time next time, maybe using the same intervention, the relaxation strategy, or a different one. They also talk amongst themselves. How long did it take you, Ben, to be able to complete the task? Compare themselves, and so there's like an addictive, competitive edge, but this time for good.
Yeah, and it works the other way. I mean, it's so fascinating having tried it myself, and I have to confess I am a bit of a competitive person, and it was funny to me because I sort of thought, oh, how is this going to work? Like, as soon as I start, I'm going to get competitive, I'm going to, and I could sort of feel myself, doing perhaps what you might think would be the opposite in terms of getting more, breathing faster, and, but actually the experience of bringing about a quality of ease in that, and it really does work. And it's amazing, actually. As an anecdote, there's a very, very good acting theorist whose name is Michael Chekhov, and he talks about performance and the highest performance, and he was one of Stanislavski's students, and he talks about this quality of ease, about development. He has a set of routines and exercises around bringing about this quality of ease, because he says when you're at that most stressed point, you need to have this quality of ease. And I couldn't help but think, gee, that's so similar as an idea, and it is quite a remarkable program that you've created. It's fantastic.
Well, thank you. And I mean, it is all about easing them into it, building up the skill set so that they do get to that point. That's why at first they relax without any challenges and learn the different strategies. And it's also about allowing young people to make their own choices, to give them information that enables them to make informed decisions. So it's that autonomy that's so important for them. And then they're making choices around things that they know they can do. So it gives them that sense of mastery and competency as well. And, the aim is that we don't want young people walking around with biofeedback devices and games, that they're doing.
Unless you're in a 1960s sci-fi movie.
No.
Go back there again.
Well, I don't know. Is that what happens at Brighton Grammar School? But it's about teaching them the approach and allowing them to gain insights about themselves on a personal level, which is different to sometimes the way wellbeing is taught. They're taught all these strategies almost as if these work, let's let's try this mindfulness class today, almost with the expectation that it's going to work for everyone. Everyone needs to feel comfortable. Everyone's going to master it, fairly quickly in the short time of, 10 sessions or 5 sessions that it might be running at the school. And that's difficult. Whereas here we're teaching them more the approach. We're giving them some practical strategies, a toolbox that they can use. But it's that insight and education that I think is really important that they take away with them. So they don't need the biofeedback all the time. It's just an introduction for that insight and self-awareness.
One of the, and thank you, and as I said, the program itself and the work and the co-design and voice and checking for understanding, it's so fantastic. And I know our listeners, when it becomes more available, will certainly be interested in, and we'll place in the show notes some further reading that people can undertake as well. I want to take you just to, we're an Understanding Boys podcast, and we're wrestling with the idea of what it is to be a good man these days. I was talking to a colleague of yours, Professor Helen Cahill, recently at the University of Melbourne, and she was saying gender, it's such is there anything more personal, in her, it was her thoughts around that. And we've talked about ethics, values, morals, routines. We've had such a great conversation. I'm wondering, Dianne, what is it to be a good man these days, do you think?
Well, I think what's really important is to be a good man. I think you need to know how to use the best of what you've actually got so that you actually live a fulfilling life and you can simultaneously contribute to the good life of other people. So I think what it takes to be a good man is to take the time to reflect, to understand your genuine self, not your social self, or desired sort of self, but your real self. And I know that can be difficult sometimes to really know yourself. But with some reflection, with some deliberate strategies, you can do that. And I think at some point and on a regular basis, people should be taking the time to do that, to know who they really are and to be able to use the best of what they've got for not just their own good but for the good of others. So you're actually trying to nurture and share the good things that you have. It doesn't mean that you never allow, the more dark side of yourself to come out. That's only natural for that to happen from time to time. But once you know what your strengths and good qualities are, it's almost like a responsibility, I think, to want to share that with others. So if you're a parent and, you really recognise that honesty is an important strength of yours or quality of yours or perseverance, to see how you can use that more often in the ways in which you communicate with your children, share stories with your children. And it doesn't necessarily mean that you have to show them examples of how you are always honest, because you're going to slip up too, but you can give examples of how you weren't honest perhaps on one occasion, and how it made you feel when you weren't honest, or what maybe the consequences were, and that you still value honesty. Does that make sense? Yeah. So it doesn't mean that you have to be perfect, but you're trying to show people
that you're authentic.
That you're authentic and that you do have some values that you think will help everybody really in the end run, in the long run. Yeah.
In the long run, yeah. Beautiful. And that part of story is a perfect segue, sharing stories with others. Share with us a story that you'd tell a 14-year-old if you'd listen.
Yeah, okay. So I think what I would say to a 14-year-old, if they were willing to listen to me, is that they should really take advantage of learning opportunities. At 14, there's still so much to learn. Learning happens throughout life. There's no age where all of a sudden you turn a certain age and learning's switched off. But because you're still young and fairly inexperienced, there is still a lot to learn. And so the thing is, they have to try and think about learning as an opportunity, like a training opportunity. And that means, therefore, they've certainly got permission to make mistakes. And it's okay to make mistakes as they're learning, as long as they feel like they're in a safe environment with trusting people. And that's what I feel that schools and family environments, on the whole, and it's not the case with every single child, but are usually those safe places where you can learn and you can experiment and try new things. And if you don't quite go as well as you'd hoped, you know, there's an opportunity to be able to analyse that and to get the support to help you get to the next level, whatever that level is. Mm-hmm. So I think taking advantage of learning environments is really important, because it helps you to grow and it helps you to become more resilient, more adaptable. And, you know, it's good to be able to do that when you're especially younger and in the training ground, because it lays a foundation for the future. And so I guess one thing that sort of has stuck with me, you know, a few years ago, a little bit of a story here, if I may. My son was invited by his friend to go on a sailing course, and he had never sailed before. He was a beginner, and it was a week-long course. And of course I supported this. My son was interested in learning to sail, but I remember thinking, oh, you know, next week he's going sailing, let me just check the weather forecast. You know, I hope it's going to be perfect weather, that it's going to be sunny but not too hot, just mild, that there's going to be some wind but not too windy, just a moderate sort of level of wind. And then the week came up, and my friends, my son's friend's dad came to pick my son up. And I remember looking up into the sky going, oh geez, looking really stormy out there, isn't it? You know, what is this weather doing? I hope it improves for the boys. And I remember the dad of my son's friend saying to me, why? You know, that's what sailing is all about, reading and navigating all the different weather conditions. And it's a perfect opportunity to have a bit of a storm, and they're in a safe environment, they're going to learn so much. It'd be great, actually, you know. And this really made me stop and think that, you know, storms are an important part of life, and if they can have some storms when they're younger, and when they're in a safe environment, when they're supported through these situations, when they're given the opportunity to learn about skills and strategies to help them, you know, manage that situation, I think it's really ideal. It's this practice that's going to actually set them up for life, and it's going to create muscle memories and these neural connections of being solution focused, of being able to think about a time when they've had some adversity and they can recall strategies that they've used and that they've been able to transition through it in their own way, whatever that transition is. And, you know, I think that's where they learn so much. So I would definitely say take advantage of learning opportunities while you can, because those skills and qualities that you learn about yourself and other people during those times are going to put you in good stead in the future, and can make a difference between having a good quality life and one where you feel competent and in control, as opposed to one where you feel hopeless, helpless, out of control, overwhelmed and anxious.
Yeah, they're two very, very different cycles, aren't they? And I'm reminded of that old saying, a calm sea never made for a skilled sailor. Thank you so much, Dianne, for your time. I feel like I've just learned a whole bunch of new things, which I'm now going to go off and read up on. But more importantly, thank you for that work that you're doing and for being a bridge builder between the ivory tower. I think I said palace earlier. But the ivory,
I'll handle the palace. I don't know that I've got a palace at the university.
That's right. Between you know, the place of learning and the rigour and the things that need to sort of be controlled for and so on, and also the general storminess and messiness of the lives of kids that we work with every day, and the sons that we're raising, and of course our daughters and others that we work with. But thank you again on behalf of all of us here at Understanding Boys for your time today.
Well, thanks, Ray. I mean, I find it the most pleasurable part of my job actually engaging with the young people that we're trying to work with to develop, a lot of the strategies. So I enjoy sharing this today and working with schools in particular. So thank you.
Well, we hope you've enjoyed this episode of the Understanding Boys podcast. Make sure you subscribe on your podcast app, and please leave us a review to help grow the community. For more information about the podcast, visit understandingboys.com.au. Until next time, thanks for listening.